Okay, so this is part 13, I believe, of my reading and commentary on the Platonic dialogue Parmenides. The beginning of this is going to be fairly bizarre. The last, I think, half of the previous episode, maybe the last half, maybe the last quarter, I don't really remember, but much of that information and material was a departure from the text. Now, it was related to it, but it was sort of a side thought process. And so now I return to the text. Can't really remember exactly where I was in this paragraph, but I know what paragraph I was in. And I'm interested to reintegrate what that exercise had to offer us into what Parmenides is saying here. So like usual, giving an introduction of where we have been is going to be difficult based on, so far, 12 episodes at 2 hours. That's 24 hours of recording, and probably double that in terms of thinking. So rather, what tends to happen is that this unfolds over time, and hopefully it's somewhat coherent. So I'd like to begin by reading from a place that I know we've touched on before. Parmenides says, "So if it is in every way one, and they are in every way not one, the one would be neither a part of the things not one, nor a whole with them as parts. And in turn, the things not one would be neither parts of the one, nor wholes in relation to the one as parts." So a little bit of background in terms of what I've been thinking about this so far. I believe we're speaking about something in two different layers, or at two different levels. On one hand, we're speaking about the one, which is an identity that coheres by oneness in being. The expression of oneness in being mediated by difference gives us all articulate things. It gives us, perhaps more fundamentally, identity. Now we have this concept of one and not one. And so the question is, well, how are we to conceptualize not one? And Parmenides, the way he explains it, it doesn't necessarily seem to be that which is not, or nothing. Not one seems to refer to a hypothetical where we may describe something as not one, because it is the case that there are things, because he refers to the things that are not one as things. So it has being, and if there is being, there is oneness there. And so the question is, well, under what conditions, in what context, are we speaking of not one? And so far I've been using this sort of liminal phase, that there are things that are things, but they're not coherent. And by their lack of coherence, we have this boundary around them that's almost a unity in and of itself, in order to say that it is not one. Now, on the other hand, like I've said, we have this identity, which is the one, which is a fundamental concept. It's a principle by which it's the soil by which identity is born. And not one is not of the same caliber or the same level, let's say. It is post the influence of the coherence of oneness and being. Now, to take this a step farther, what we explored in the last part of the last episode, was this idea of kind, character, properties, qualities, and identity itself, and the relationship among all of these things. And I think generally the sentiment was that from one standpoint we can view it linearly, in which we see the influence of oneness and being partaking in this project of identity formation through difference. And by difference we have separation, physical separation, but also in terms of agreeability. We have relationality that emerges at this place. We have inside and outside. We have this and not that. This and not that is probably the most fundamental. It's non-descriptive, and yet it's a determination. And if we were to say, okay, well, what about that which we would say is not one? On one hand, we can find it at the layer in which there are many well-identified things. And by these well-identified things, I mean that they have properties. The properties are cohered together in the way that they are stable, and that stability gives it character. Now, stability itself is something that's a precondition for a kind to emerge. So the question still sort of remains, are we to think about not one at the most fundamental level, in which it may occupy this nondescript but determinate grammar, or are we to say that it occupies the realm of descriptive properties and qualities, but is ill-defined, and by that ill definition we have this sort of liminal or transitory placeholder? The latter, obviously, is the one that I've been using. But now that I raised the former, I have to wonder about it. Even at the most fundamental level, or if we are to say not one, it's like we are saying this and not that. And if that is the case, then it exists at the pre-defined stage. But even if it exists there, it would still be an identity. It would still be something. It would still participate in the substrate of the one. And so all of this inside and outside language, I have to wonder, because again, this inside and outside language is also the grammar of this in an indefinite, or rather, nondescript, I should say, territory. So I want to try and pick this apart and see what we can make of this. So if it is in every way one, talking about the one, and they are in every way not one. So here is the first appearance of that language, at least in this statement. Now we have a relative situation in which not one is a thing, or it might be a series of things. In fact, it's likely a series of things because of how Parmenides has referred to it in the past. He says, the one would be neither a part of the things not one. So why? Why is this the case? The one would be neither a part of the things not one. Now, oneness in being, I would say states are of states that are, they are states that are preconditions. They're principles. We get into parts, I think, once we hit the articulate, a certain articulate threshold. Now that doesn't really mean anything in and of itself. So what do I mean by that? I think once there's a conglomeration of properties, or rather, I should say qualities, because properties are superficial. So of these qualities, once we have this aggregation and consolidation on some sort of stable identity, then we have what we would call parts. Before this, we don't have anything definite. Or again, descriptive is probably a better word. Definite, I think, we'll leave that aside. So if we are to be speaking of these parts in this way, I think it must be of the latter type of interpretation, meaning that this not one, or the series of things that are not one, are participating in a layer or at a level that the one does not have the same type of interaction with. The one's expression of coherence is prerequisite to the not one. So these parts and wholes determination is not nonsensical, I think, in a sense. So again, so if it is in every way one, and they are in every way not one, the one would be neither a part of the things not one, nor a whole with them as parts. And in turn, the things not one would be neither parts of the one, nor wholes in relation to the one as part. To this, Aristotle says, no, they wouldn't. But in fact, we said things that are neither parts nor wholes, nor different from each other, will be the same as each other. So are we to say that the one, since it is so related to the things not one, and the same as they are, let's say so, says Aristotle. Therefore the one, as it seems, is both different from the others and itself. And the same as the others and itself. It certainly looks that way from our argument. Now this is only possible if we have these levels, these layers of distinction by which we are perceiving how oneness is expressed. There are many different angles by which the qualities of something can cohere and be solidified in some sort of identity. So again, one of the primary contentions is that we are unable to reconcile the one and not one as being involved in each other in the manner of the inside and outside language. That the one is not a part of not one, and not one is not a part of the one. In turn, Parmenides says, the things not one would be neither parts of the one nor wholes in relation to the one as part. But in fact, we said that things that are neither parts nor wholes nor different from each other will be the same as each other. So are we to say that the one, since it is so related to the things not one, is the same as they are? Let's say so, says Aristotle. Therefore the one, as it seems, is both different from the others and itself, and the same as the others and itself. It certainly looks that way from our argument, says Aristotle. Now this is a strange turn, a turn that doesn't quite make sense on its face. I suppose the first question is, why must Parmenides suggest that there is sameness between the one and not one? It would seem that for much of what we have done so far is to make this distinction between the two. They don't share parts. They are not they don't share this inside and outside language with each other. And I suppose there's two layers of difficulty that I have with this. One is that I have not been able to follow this 100% through, because I am of the opinion that there cannot be something that is just not one. It's a contradiction in speech to say that there is something is to say that there is being. If we are to say that there is being, we say that in order for being to be coherent, it has to partake in oneness. And if there is this coherence, then we have the influence of the one. And Parmenides said earlier that the things not one could not be a number either, for in that case too, they would not be absolutely not one, since they would at least have number. And again, are the things not one parts of the one? Or would the things not one in that case too partake of the one? Then we go into this idea of that they would actually partake in it. So maybe this is where part of the confusion rests, because we took our detour right around this point. And again he continues, so if it is in every way one, and they are in every way not one, and the one would be neither a part of the things not one, nor a whole with them as parts, and in turn the things not one would be neither parts of the one nor wholes in relation to the one as part. Now, this is all within the belief that they partake in the one. And I have to wonder here if our exploration did not get us a little bit farther than where Parmenides is suggesting, because we've outlined this landscape that gives us a linear progression from the one to things that are increasingly more descriptive. And so now we're at a place where we have this possibility of the one and not one being the same. I'll read this one more time. So if it is in every way one, and they are in every way not one, the one would be neither a part of the things not one, nor a whole with them as parts. And in turn, the things not one would be neither parts of the one nor wholes in relation to the one as part. And we're keeping in mind that this has to do with not one partaking in the one. But it's a matter of how exactly is it partaking in the one. He continues, but in fact, we said that the things that are neither parts nor wholes, nor different from each other, will be the same as each other. Now this is a difficult expression, I think. Things that are neither parts nor wholes nor different from each other. Here again we get into this difficulty that I have with the word sameness. There are two different kinds. There's the kind of sameness by which we look in the mirror, and there's the kind of sameness that has a stronger form of differentiation. Like in material things, for example, we can have a degree of sameness that is quite exacting, and to the naked eye there wouldn't be much difference. The difference, obviously, would be because that they're two different material structures. They differ placed on their position. There are subtle differences, perhaps, that we just can't perceive. Even some of the most precise industrial manufacture still makes error, or we can call it error, but difference from one thing to another. And we can ask ourselves the question, or we can go through the exercise, am I a part of myself? Or am I a whole of myself? In the first instance, there's a complication, I think, with the analogy, because the self is a part of the identity, I would say. It's the principle, it is the capital aspect of the thing, and perhaps by the capital aspect we would center its identity. That's where the light cone would be centered. So it becomes increasingly difficult to use this as an example. But let's say I take the sculpture that I have on my desk. It is on one hand we could say that it is a whole, but is it a whole of itself? I suppose we can say that. But it's not a whole that is different from itself, nor a part that is different from itself. In order to reflect itself back, we have, of course, a matter of comparison. But that matter of comparison is one-to-one. But if in fact we said that things that are neither parts nor wholes nor different from each other will be the same as each other, the one, since it is so related to the thing as not one, is the same as they are. The one, as it seems, is both different from the others and itself, and the same as the others and itself. And here is really where the mind must go to explore. Because by the linear progression, we understand that identity is born. The embryo of identity is born within the description or the determination of stability across difference. However, it's not as though, because we have the formation of identity, that we have the destruction of that which it is built on, because of course we do. We have oneness in being, or the coherence of that facilitates this structure. And so, as a matter of observation, when we look at this identity, even if it in its most primitive, pre-descriptive form, we are seeing a reverberation of the oneness in being. But again, at a particular angle. I can't get away from this way of describing it. The angle being that expression of the coherence. And I have to wonder about the possibility of the fullest expression of the coherence. This would be a type of purity, I suppose, of the one, without all of the mess of difference, of differentiation. Now, this mess of differentiation we've been thinking of in linear terms. But this is where I think we have to be careful. And there's a more sophisticated image that we are, I think, about to enter into. For what I feel is that this not one and one business and the relatedness of the two is going to be, when revisited, as we are doing now, I think it's going to serve as the exercise that is multi-rewarding. So in the first instance, we've described not one as occupying a particular place. A moment ago, I can't remember if it was in this episode or in the last, because I've started this again on a new day, but nonetheless. We've described the potential for not one being either a liminal state, in which there are these determinate identities that are grouped together in something that we call not one, because they don't really cohere they don't cohere, period. There's no coherence, there's no common unification among them. But because there is no common unification among them, we can identify this cluster of chaos and say that is something, even if it's a pattern of chaos. And it would be relevant if that pattern of chaos is within bumping up against the boundaries of other things that are more stable identities across time, given that particular scale. So for example, if we take a state, take the United States, and then we take China, for example. And then in between them doesn't have to be literally in between them, like a physical in between. It could just sort of be in between the power approximation. We have a collection of city-states. In and of themselves, they are these identities, but they themselves don't cohere together. Let's say they're, maybe a mixture of Western city-states and Asian city-states. Now, this doesn't have any grounding, because that doesn't really exist outside of Singapore. But I think it would at least serve the potential for this thing to exist. And my mind goes to the ancient world with the Greek city-states, in which they are not a coherent identity. There are aspects of them that cohere themselves more than states outside of them, which makes them sort of their own experience, the Greek experience. There's a shared culture, similar language. But outside of the particular city-states, they often view each other sort of as outsiders, potential enemies, or trading partners, friends, whatever. It's not like in the United States, where we have many different principalities, all united into one federalized system. So I guess that's an example that was a true historical example that would make sense there. So I say that to say that this not one business is sort of an identity that is forced together by the potential surroundings, but these surroundings are quite determinate. Okay, so that's one. Then the other one was the scenario in which we are moving predeterminate, and yet the language of not one is more of the language of not that, let's say. So we point to something that is one, we say, this is one. And then we say, this is not one, because it's just not that. But it's still something. It's almost like we're saying non-being versus being. Of course, non-being is, so non-being is something. And so if it is something, it is being, but non-being has a particular expression of being. Non-being is, I think, equivalent to difference or differentiation. At least that's the practical expression of it. This is the whole narrative of the sophist. It's a bit of a dualistic, what ends up, I think, is a bit of a dualistic conclusion. But here, I think, interestingly, we're tasked to consider something that is even broader. And I'm glad that the Parmenides is after the sophist in the text that I have here, because it would seem quite bizarre to read the sophist after this. In one sense, because where we are now is quite beyond a particular dualism. We're looking for unification in a place where we have this three-part identity of the whole and two parts, which is the being and oneness as they cohere. And this thing's relationship to all that is, both that which has yet to be determined and that which is determined. Now here I think it might be useful to speak about this determined and non-determined business. Now, equality can be defined as a stable mode of determination by which an identity is what it is across varying instances and perspectives. Now, across varying instances, these instances would manifest in terms of properties. These are things that we are more superficially attributing to identities, like the color of something, the weight of something. Now, again, we're focusing on something that is determinate. So we say that it is stable. It persists through change. It persists through difference. It's not momentary. And I think most importantly is that idea of the mode of determination. The quality is not a thing, part or property. It's a way. It's a way in which an identity is structured and held. So within determination, we have this idea of a way. The way is something that has fascinated me, especially in the readings of the Proverbs. By the way, we have a direction. And by direction, we have sort of a goal, a purpose. So we have something that is stable across difference. And it has a particular direction, orientation. And by this direction, its capacity is determined. So for example, there are many different types of glasses out there. There are many different types of silverware. A fork cannot hold water, but a spoon can. And because of these, I think we would say qualities, they are able to maintain themselves as an identity. Again, this language is a bit off. They're able to maintain their particular kind. The identity is, again, it precedes it. But they can maintain their kind. So today happens to be a new day. And sometimes when I start a new day, I begin by saying thank you for the new day, because it's, at least as it relates to this situation, this podcast, sometimes the previous day there may have been a thought here and there that was useful, but some days just don't articulate as well as some others. And I can't claim to say that today is going to be one of those days that is particularly good or productive, but nonetheless, I think it's an interesting reflection, even more generally, in the sense that there are so many things throughout the day that must be done, and at times it feels the relationship is a bit off, it would seem, but at times it feels as though there's a productive engine that only has so much fuel, and eventually the fuel runs out. But the real question is, or the more important question, is what about this fuel tank? What can I do about it? How can I expand it? Do I need a rest? What does a rest in this situation look like? What is it for? What is its purpose? And for my part, my mistakes are riddled in between finding a solid answer for what that question is. And I know on one hand that if I were to compare myself to a hypothetical, not just another, but a hypothetical, I can imagine a situation in which I had found that light, that inner drive that is always working, it is always moving. It cares not for the difficulty of the ascent on a new journey, intellectual or physical or otherwise. It accepts it because it knows that at the top, or rather on the come up despite the pain, there will be some productive output. Now, that's not to say that this podcast has been slacked off on, let's say. Well, that's incorrect. For most of the days out of the week, the discipline remains strong. There's one day, sometimes two, for which the productivity is less. Not absent, but less. And it's by finding where that productive drive is lost and where it is to be found to be created again. Sometimes I think about reflection as a point at which we can serve to reset ourselves and say, okay, I've been feeling this way, and I know that certain things are also beginning to feel a certain way. Why is that the case? Can I boil it down to something like weakness or lethargy or laziness? Perhaps, but that denies much of your experience. It doesn't do anything productive. The thing is to figure out why one of these situations might occur. And it would seem that a matter of the heart is involved. And I would like to loop this back around on what we were talking about. But for now, we're at the surface. For the heart's desires pull quite strongly on our orientation, our ontological expression. And that's no strong insight, of course. It's everybody's experience. And the heart is, bizarrely enough, when we think about relating, if we relate to ourselves in a particular way, we can expand our awareness of it, but also expand our capacity in general. There's particular types of capacity, I suppose, especially when we talk about the heart. like the desiring of things that are good or bad. What constitutes the goodness or the bad? If something constitutes the bad, and if we are to be the lovers of the good, why do we pursue it if we have established it to be bad? Sometimes I wonder at that sin of passivity, for which the mind desires absent. It desires to not be aware of itself and to just passively either consume information, which doesn't lead to good retention, or to almost shut down entirely, such that even the most simple thoughts are difficult to bring forth. And I've had both of these experiences. And there are these questions of burnout, but again, it goes back to this idea of capacity and of relating to oneself, of giving space to breathe when those spaces are necessary, but the type of breaths we would wish them to be productive. And the subtlety of grace there, I have to think, is powerful. Because if we would imagine that our moments of desire to do something productive, to engage in something good, is overpowered by something else. Maybe it's our desire for passivity, our fear of something, our sort of innate, I've already said it's passivity, laziness would be on top of that. And certainly those things in life that we come to, let's say a dialogue with somebody, those dialogues in life that we come to call beautiful, they must have a particular structure, like an unfolding, blooming flower. That what happens is an improved understanding, improved relating, improved sense of being and belonging. Of this belonging, I think there are so many things that we can do in our lives to enhance this belonging. But perhaps out of fear or imagination of difficulty or pain, whatever, we find ourselves thinking, I find myself thinking at times, that it can wait. That there is that potential for burnout, and I have to be careful, otherwise the system is going to shut down without my ability to turn the ship, have all of these negative emotions fill my heart, and have no understanding or no wisdom for how to remedy the situation. And sometimes I have to wonder also at our experiences throughout life and how formative experiences may have transformed the way in which we participate with information. And the child, I think, that learns a management style that is more of a, almost like an addict, somebody that wishes to escape the primary, or wishes just to close their eyes to the pain that is in front of them. That regardless of the scale, whether it be, again, induced by some traumatic event or some culture of stagnation, doesn't matter, I think it has the same effects. that this then is ingrained in the mind. It's something that it becomes very positively felt. And it's hard for somebody to understand how to go back in there and to move the pieces around so that the light shines forth a little bit better. Now, when we're thinking about this type of ontological growth or productive growth of the of the being, of the agent, I can't help but to think about this pre-identity situation, or rather, I should say pre-kind situation. So identity pre-designation of kind. And although I've gone through the definition a few times, it's very hard for me to wrap my head around it visually. And this is what I wish to do. I know the vision will put it in my memory like nothing else will. So if I'm going back to that self-reflective place, and I find within there a particular way of relating, I think we have to think for a moment about what this means exactly. So relating in the sense that, as we all do, but in the hypothetical, thinking about me as a child, let's say 8, 9, 10 years old. That in this developing place, there's not much of the explicit, maybe there is sometimes, but there's not much of this explicit self-reflection. I don't claim to say that that's good or bad, but the point that I'm trying to make is that experiences, or rather information, entered into me, shaped me, molded me, helped me identify a certain way. And I don't think it's a particular secret that culturally, in the modern age, identity has become more of a central issue. We know the obvious pathologies that are before us, but regardless of this strange cultural shift into the nature of identity and having it become, like I said, pathologized and even harbored within institutions, it's a very large topic, actually. And as the conscious experience and the self-aware experience processes all of this, I think a lot of this is just happening under the hood. For I just started this segment today reflecting on my experience and how I'm uncertain about the reason I do certain things. So at the base, it at least describes that there are things about me, the central identity, that I'm unaware of. And perhaps that there is a selfishness there, that I think that I am restricted to whatever is speaking. And rather, perhaps the self is a little bit larger, or ought to be made larger, and include those aspects of being that are unseen or denied, unheard perhaps, unattended to. Like all of these flow in there. And it's not really a matter of consistently standing outside of the self. I think some outside of the selfness is necessary to understand it, but nonetheless, identity can still be a complicated issue. Now, I'm not sure where I'm going to fall back into this dialogue. I'm thinking I'm probably just going to progress to the next paragraph. Still some unexplored territory. I don't understand completely what is being said here. But as long as we're building this map consistently, I think we can continue to move on. I can't help but go back to this idea of the linear structure that we've produced. That we have oneness in being, a cohering structure, a reciprocally producing partner, by which the interaction of the two again, the coherence of the two. I'm trying to find other language just to fill in more space. And hopefully, obviously, when filling in more space, it's not just dead space, but it's productive. Sometimes I think that I'm lost when I'm thinking about the one and oneness in being. And other times I remember where I've been before and what seems to be a likely answer, or at least a nice placeholder until I find a better one. This coherence of being, there's a spark of difference in it. There's, I think, the identity of the one as it shines most clearly, because it is the union point of the two parts. It is what consolidates them into one. And on the other end of that consolidation, we have expression. We have expression of the mechanics involved, which means, even though that the one is solidified in its being by oneness in being, the spark of difference that I'm, at least for now, placing at this point of coherence is also working. So we have production, and I think that what's necessary for production is the difference. Difference is necessary for the coherence to be at all, because there's a difference between oneness and being. And so it seems like that this structure of the one is the first reciprocated experience. What do I mean by that? It's a self-communicative process, a self-reflective process. Self-reflective in the sense that there's an awareness, there's a tending towards let's just say awareness for now, that self-reflection is it's a place where, as we've said, the identity goes back to a point and discovers those things that were at first unknown to it, that just sort of occur. But it's not completely unknown because it's integrated. There are things that we do, as I started this out, that we don't understand. There are behaviors that take place. Perhaps they're good. Maybe they're bad. In my particular case, in this segment, it's been to determine why I can't just sort of have the on switch on all of the time and need these more passive moments. And in there's all sorts of different things. Even in the most inattentive years, we can see a degree of what happened when we go back and move pieces around. Now, while there is not a complete symmetry here, and it's perhaps a bit dissonant, I return to this the one identity. And I think eventually, along some road, the road of that expression of the coherence of oneness and being, we will find determinations. And I always feel like I mix up these two words, determination and description. So I have to understand this better. In what way do I mean either the word description or determination? Because there is a meaning there, regardless of what word that I may think may be most appropriate. Farther on down the line, what I would expect to see are these, what we've been calling qualities. I think we've been calling them qualities, which are layers of information packaged in a particular way that what? What do these packages of information do? By the reverberation and the graduated, the language here I think is not completely adequate, but the outward expansion of the coherence of oneness and being, and the implicit difference is something that is obviously a generative force. And before we get to the layers upon layers, I would say, I think there's probabilities have something to do with this here. But layers upon layers of graduated difference and identity formation with that expression of the coherence of oneness and being. What still seems quite opaque, and we've talked about this before, because language here, descriptive language, takes a bit of a hit. And perhaps there we get a better idea of my intention about what word to use. Because a description means that there's a quality that you can go to use to describe what that thing is. But of course, this missing link, or maybe not it's of course, but the missing link seems to just jump from, or rather I should say that the coherence of oneness and being just seems to jump from that state to an initial point of difference. This is sort of out of the garden situation for us, where now all of this difference is taking place. all of the things that we are aware of, all of these relationships, our incapacity to put them together and to understand exactly what they mean, our failures and our successes, our strengths and our weaknesses. So I think here I would like to begin the next paragraph. And some of the previous material, like I mentioned, if this has not been gone over sufficiently, hopefully the continuation of these concepts will leave us no choice but to address it. So Parmenides says, would the one then also be both like and unlike itself and the others? Aristotle says, perhaps. At any rate, Parmenides continues, since it was shown to be different from the others would surely also be different from it. To be sure. Wouldn't it be different from the others, just as they are different from it, and neither more nor less? Yes, why not? So if neither more nor less in like degree, yes. Accordingly, insofar as it has the property of being different from the others, and they, likewise, have the property of being different from it. In this way, the one would have a property the same as the others, and they would have a property the same as it. What do you mean? So we're going to take this line by line. Would the one then also be both like and unlike itself and the others? So let's think about this. This term likeness has come back again. An important word, one that almost needs to be rehashed or refleshed, I should say, born again every time it's discussed. So since I think there's this general trend of understanding that the one has influence in all things, but maybe it's hard to say exactly where we are in those proceedings. For on one hand, if we assumed that there was a presence of the one, that is, coherence again, was the substrate by which the finer articulate things are born and go through various processes of coming to be and ceasing to be and maintaining, challenging, resisting, but all the same sort of dynamic. We see the coherence here of oneness and being in all things. And in this way we can see that the variation is unlike the purity of the one, and yet we cannot fail to recognize that coherence of an aspect of it. So in this way, there is an unlikeness from one to the other, from the other things to that which is one. And by the same token, we have a similarity in the sense that the finer, angular, articulate things they come to be because of the coherence of oneness in being, which is the one. He says, since it was shown to be different from the others would surely also be different from it. So now we're taking that one path, thinking about the ways in which the others are different from the one. And the primary, I think the rooted way in which they are different is that the other things do not possess the purity of, and perhaps this is just something that just sort of exists in thought. I'm not really sure how to think of this right now. Maybe I should stay away from that language. But what I mean to say is that the concept of the one is just the principles without differentiation. Is something that can be considered. It's something that can be reasoned to. And it is something that is altogether different from the place that we start, the others that Parmenides mentions. I find myself in a particular way. I know that I myself am a product of this union, and yet I understand myself to be in some way separate from the one. Almost like my parents have a particular union. They are in a union together, and I'm a part of the family. But I'm not necessarily a part of the marriage in a particular sense. There's parts of the marriage that are closed to the offspring, necessarily so. Maybe that's not the best way to frame it, but there's an inside and outside dynamic there that maintains a coherence, or rather maybe I should say an intelligibility of the principles. And if the principles were not intelligible by themselves and for themselves, then I have to wonder about the downstream effects, because you can't have something that's intelligible from something that's not itself intelligible. He continues and he says, wouldn't it be different from the others just as they are different from it, and neither more nor less? And I think that this is consistent, because the degree of separation that the others possess, or maybe I should say the sharpness, if we just think for a moment a circle, and we think about the degrees that come off of a circle, where you have a being that occupies a degree, which is like an expression of the slice of that thing. It's not a very sophisticated analogy, but at least it gives a simple representation of what this might look like. So we have one being that we bring into mind, and we say of the total of the principle of oneness in being. Even here, the language is off. I'll refine it in a moment. So of the total of oneness in being, whatever that might mean, we have an expression. Does it mean that the expression is somehow taking up the wholeness of being? That the full expression of something would necessarily mean that it is the one? And I think that this is not the case. The full expression of something is the maintenance of that thing in time, the perhaps the propagation, the creation of that thing, the continued creation of that thing, of that order. I come back to the term angular expression a lot. And while the initial example, the initial angular example, in the circular sense, does not really track very well, I do think that sort of structurally, these angles are, the geometry is fundamental. And it's harder to say that we take the others as a massive placeholder for articulate and differentiated things. Of these others, it's not as though we can say that they are partial representations of the one insofar as the properties that define them over time are necessarily constrictive. The properties themselves are participants of the one's nature, or the one's coherence, rather. And so it's a layered and tiered structure, like many things are. They sort of have to be. They're dimensional, they're dynamic. So there's one thing I want to say here about my use of the word property and the use of the word property that's coming up here. I think one of the beautiful things about language, and also one of the scary things about language, is that it can be quite adaptable. And unfortunately at times it can be a bit mobile, in the sense that something that's rigidly defined doesn't hold, and words over time, perhaps by popular usage, begin to change in their meaning. And so I'll try to be as specific as I can about the things that I mean, even if sometimes the words may be used interchangeably. Property here, I think, is going to be one of those. So again, he says, wouldn't it be different from the others, just as they are different from it, and neither more nor less? Now this difference, of course, is the expression of the coherence of oneness and being, or rather, the one is we could say that through the expression of oneness and being, difference creates these angular identities. And again, I say angular, we're going back to the original thought here, that we have to be careful to say that these expressions, these identities, are parts of a whole. That is the one. It doesn't really work that way. And maybe I should change my usage of angular expression and have it maybe more in positional language. Positional could still be angular, but it wouldn't be angular by a direct line, let's say. It's through the levels, the angles cohere, and they produce something that is unique. But in this, we have sort of an ontological, or a sunrise view, let's say, of identity. What do I mean by this? So when I say a sunrise view, We don't necessarily have to restrict it to just the sunrise, but the sun moving in general, and then an object on a sunny day, let's say, that is in some place relatively flat, some place that we can see the movement of the shadow as the sun moves over the identity. As the sun moves around and over this identity, we are able to see different expressions of the individual, let's say. I think that maybe the analogy works even better if it's cast against a darkened surface. Light is cast against a darkened surface. In this image, there is more of a uncertainty at the aspects of the identity that are not visible. Now, there's multiple analogies that I think can be used there, but in the way that I'm most interested, and the way that doesn't completely fulfill this example, but at least it in part does, is that if we just took one snapshot at any particular angle by which we view something, view this identity, if we expand the analogy and say that each one of these images is a different identity, just ignoring for a moment that in my analogy I'm just saying taking an identity and exposing different things of it into view. Let's just say that an identity, we don't have that problem. So we have an identity that's fully visible. We understand the things about it that constitute it, that define it, whatever. And then we have other identities for which we know. Now, the light analogy makes sense really only when we're talking about others, so multiple identities, the effects of difference and differentiation. And to the degree that these things orient themselves with the principles that have been provided them by the One, or the expression of the One, so I could say the orientation that is afforded by the expression of the One, its degree of otherness or difference will be to the degree that it is expressed by difference. And I think that maybe that's a bad way to put it, but it just means to say that the uniqueness, the descriptiveness of something will be that much more, well, maybe I should get away from that language of more, but it will be characterized by its separation from the One, insofar as it has these unique property-esque, or maybe I should say more in line with what we've been using, quality-esque. And it's that these qualities that are maintained, again, through difference, they're maintained over time, but despite difference, they are maintained through difference, just meaning that because it coheres in this way, there are all of these other identities around it, and the One is this sort of centralizing, humming thing that gives it structure, gives it possibility, gives it the creative underpinning for it to be, to manifest. But I'm struggling to put into words the language that articulates what Parmenides is saying. It is different, or rather, otherness is different from the One by its orientation. I think that's the best way to think about it. But the broader image is one of this sort of light cone situation in which these qualities are cohering to some determination, some initial determination of inside, outside, this, not that. And as they begin to cohere, we have not necessarily a moving away from the one, but rather an expression of the one, a farthering expression of the one through constraint, but also by this sort of interweaving of difference that makes it discontinuous with another identity, maintains itself, coheres together on these levels, as we've mentioned. And the levels, I think, are seen obviously, most clearly, when we speak about the kind, because as something begins to become quite differentiated and quite articulate, let's say anything sort of material in expression, they contain many different parts to them, parts of them that all participate in a unity. That in and of itself is an expression of the microcosm and the macrocosm of the ways in which that strata of the one and its expression is sort of pushed into existence. He continues, so if neither more nor less in like degree. So I wonder if there's anywhere else to go from here. So he's using degree, so I think angular expression is still the fanciful, or rather a vogue way to describe this expression. So it has to be reciprocal, for that coherence of oneness and being is the ground of it all. And so otherness is almost like a mirror. Its journey is a mirror from the expression of that principle. Accordingly, insofar as it has the property of being different from the others, and they, likewise, have the property of being different from it. In this way, the one would have a property the same as the others, and they would have a property the same as it. Now, to this, Aristotle asks the question, what do you mean? Insofar as the property of being different from the others and they. So he's using property here. It's kind of an interesting word for the level that he's at. We've been sort of using something like determinate to be placed here because this is he's calling being different this, not that, as a property. And in our grammar, property is reserved all the way downstream, past qualities, past likeness. But it doesn't really matter. Have the property of being different from it. In this way, the one would have a property the same as the others. And the property is that by difference, the coherence of the one is maintained, not just the coherence of oneness in being, but the coherence of the one. So it all participates in the same lawful structure, let's say. So today happens to be a new day, and like always, a new day brings new thoughts. So it happens to be a Monday evening after work. It's always an exciting experience working back up to some useful thought. So I believe we left off when Parmenides was saying, accordingly, insofar as it has the property of being different from the others, and they, likewise, have the property of being different from it. In this way, the one would have a property the same as the others, and they would have a property the same as it. So this is where we found ourselves in the strange territory of a potential linguistic entangling because of a differing definition for a word. For what we see here now, in terms of this word property, it is meant to refer to something that is of the thing that we are speaking of. It is meant to be something that is shared between both of them, and because it is shared between both of them, I think it has to be fundamental. Now, it has to be fundamental because the nature of the one being composed of oneness and being is the principle by which all other things cohere. Sorry for the noise. My cat has found my bookmark, and there's a fuzzy end to it, and so he's rather entertained by it. But unfortunately, it's right by my microphone, so hopefully he's able to contain himself. Now, in this case, the shared property is the property of difference. Insofar as it has the property of being different from the others, and they likewise have the property of being different from it. So I suppose it's an interesting angle to tackle this topic. That at the very least they're related by difference. Because difference is the thing that outlines the one and keeps it separate from things that are other than it. In this way, the one would have a property the same as the others, and they would have a property the same as it. Now, in explanation of that, Parmenides says as follows: don't you apply to something each name you use? I do. Now, could you use the same name either more than once or once? I could, says Aristotle. So if you use it once, do you call by the name that thing whose name it is, but not that thing, if you use it many times? Or whether you utter the same name once or many times, do you quite necessarily also speak of the same thing? To be sure. Now, different in particular is a name of something, isn't it? Certainly. So when you utter it, whether once or many times, you don't apply to it another thing or name something other than that thing whose name it is, necessarily. Whenever we say the others are different from the one, and the one is different from the others, although we use different twice, we don't apply it to another nature, but always to that nature whose name it is. Of course. So insofar as the one is different from the others, and the others from the one, on the basis of having the property difference itself, the one would have a property not other, but the same as the others. And that which has a property the same is surely like, isn't it? Yes. Indeed, insofar as the one has the property of being different from the others, owing to that property itself, it would be altogether like them all, because it is altogether different from them all. So it seems. So again, an interesting road to go down here, and I have to wonder, sometimes in my professional life, in my personal life, I like to explore the margins before I really get into the meat of the subject matter at hand. And I think what this helps do is expose where the boundaries are at. And even if the centerpiece is not firmly grasped in this exercise, at least we know where to go to find the centerpiece. And so when we speak of difference in this way, we're not talking about the specific identity of the others, nor are we talking about the specific identity of the one. There is a relationship to the specific identities, of course, but it's by difference, this sort of third man, that we are approaching it. So let's go through this line by line. Don't you apply to something each name you use? Now this may seem a little bit more effort than is necessary, but I want to think for a moment about this word apply. Now it's actually something that has come up before, so I don't think it's going to be a useless exercise to look up the etymology of the term. The word apply originates from the Latin root applicare, which literally translates to fold, to, or to join. And so we have a sense of bringing things into contact with one another. In the 14th century, in Old French, used to mean to join, combine, or attach. In the 15th century, we have shifted a shift of meaning towards putting to work or devoting mental powers to a task. So if we stick close to its roots, and we think about this joining or combining or even just attending to, such that there brings closer these things. So again, don't you apply to something each name you use. Now application can be much like you apply a cleaner solution to a surface. But it's a form of bringing something into contact with something else. But in this context, it's we don't use it very often. Don't you apply to something each name you use. it brings into mind the importance of naming, number one. The value that's associated with that name, the accuracy of it. And also there is a sense in which when we make an application to something, there is one name for that thing. Because it's a stable identity, it holds itself over time. In language, naming is served to capture that. So a name is applied to a thing as think in a few different contexts here. On one hand, it's the value of an observer, or the value that an observer places on a thing by the name that they give it. But it's also to realize and to recognize its identity, to give it a name, because it recognizes its stability over time. Now, just because we give something a name doesn't mean that it, well, I was about to say that just because we give something a name doesn't mean it influences its identity, but I think it does, perhaps in some cases more than others. But in any case, regardless of our concern about the observer's frailty in recognizing the true nature of something, what appears to me to be quite valuable in this sort of question of approximation, in the sense that we use these names to relate to things, to relate to being, I think. I think this is quite important. Even if we use the name difference, we are still relating to being. And we're using it in this context to express a similarity. Again, I think it's a strange road, but it does give us a boundary. It gives us those goalposts by which we can begin to narrow our approach to make our descent on the runway of something that's even more meaningful. Parmenides continues and he says, "Now could you use the same name either more than once or once? No limitation on the number of times that it is used. So if you use it once, do you call by name that thing whose name it is, but not that thing if you use it many times?" It wouldn't matter how many times we use it, because if the name is to be something that is stable and accurate to the nature of something, then all we are doing is invoking. We are bringing into mind, into attention, the identity of that thing. Or whether you utter the same name once or many times, do you quite necessarily always also speak of the same thing? Now, different, in particular, is the name of something, isn't it? Now, this reminds me of the dialogue, The Sophist, in which they spend some time establishing that non-being is a thing. It's not complete absence. And non-being was sort of a principle that preceded difference in a way. Its principled action was differentiation. It was the queen and king duality, in which the king was being and the queen was non-being. But this framework, I think, is much more fun. Having this trinity, having the one being the expression of the coherence between oneness and being. So when you utter it, or difference, whether once or many times, you don't apply it to another thing or name something other than that thing whose name it is. Whenever we say that the others are different from the one, and the one is different from the others, although we use different twice, we don't apply it to another nature, but always to that nature whose name it is. Now, Parmenides is not saying anything that is particularly difficult to understand here. I think that much is clear. But there's reflection on naming and having the name being constant is an interesting thought. What's most interesting, I've already mentioned, this idea of bringing something together or approximating realizing something in the mind, bringing it to the forepoint of attention. So insofar as the one is different from the others, and the others from the one, on the basis of having the property difference itself, the one would have a property not other, but the same as the others. In this sort of roundabout way of establishing likeness, I find interesting. For what do we do with this likeness? What do we do with these connection points? Well, we say that there is relation. Okay? There's relation between the one and others. There's relation in property. And by this, what exactly? Are we seeing a broader network? Are we seeing something that is robust? We're not so sure yet. And that which has a property, the same is surely like, isn't it? Indeed, insofar as the one has the property of being different from the others, owing to that property itself, it would be altogether like them all, because it is altogether different from them all. Yet, on the other hand, the like is opposite to the unlike. Yes, says Aristotle. Isn't the different also opposite to the same? That too. But this was shown as well, that the one is the same as the others. Yes, it was. And being the same as the others is the property opposite to being different from the others. Certainly. Insofar as the one is different, it was shown to be like. Yes. Insofar as it is the same, it will be unlike, owing to the property opposite to that which makes it like. And surely the different made it like. Yes. So the same will make it unlike. Otherwise it won't be opposite to the different. So it seems. Therefore, the one will be like and unlike the others. Insofar it is different, and insofar as it is the same, unlike. Yes, it admits of this argument too, as it seems. So today happens to be a new day, and like always, a new day brings new thoughts. Yet, on the other hand, says Parmenides, the like is opposite to the unlike. So in order to reorient my mind, I want to give a little bit of an exploration into what we've been saying so far. Hopefully it's something somewhat substantive. We're still trying to find the exact relationship between the one and the others, or the many. And I think it's interesting, we've made good headway in some areas. And certainly there's been some independent exploration that has brought us to certain conclusions that perhaps may be a little bit far from where we are now in the dialogue. That's not to say that we've made the correct conclusion, but rather we've walked in a particular direction. And so now it's important to keep in mind that we have to sort of come back and do the groundwork and reassess and progress from there and see if it agrees with our conclusions or not, if we have to modify them, whatever. Yet, on the other hand, he says, the like is opposite to the unlike. Isn't the different also opposite to the same? Now, I've taken issue with this in the past. I've also let it go in the past. There's an aspect of the same that would seem to imply comparison. There's a way in which we can say that sameness is a type of equivalence, but in an equivalent state we have something that is equal to another thing. And by this, it's not necessarily the same thing. Well, it is the same thing, but it's not necessarily. See, this is the problem with the word. The question is, does sameness actually imply identical, or some other way of expressing an exact oneness or an exact identity with what we're speaking about? And it's difficult, I think, because it exists at multiple layers, like many things that we are discussing. There's a certain point at which I referred to the word same or sameness as something that implied difference, rather than something being the opposite of difference. Now, part of the reason why I made that conjecture is because I felt that to have one thing the same as another, that otherness implied difference. If you have two things and you're to say one is the same as the other, it doesn't matter if how close they are in terms of certain qualities or properties. They are separated by some degree. Originally, this definition came out of the exploration of the one as a perfect unity, and not really having these parts of oneness and being. And in that sense, we were describing something that was pre-articulate, pre-difference. And in the case of being pre-articulate and pre-difference, the one did not participate in sameness. Sameness was only something of an articulate expression. And so the question, I suppose, is now, can we completely surrender that, or do we have to take into consideration the possibility of having two things being labeled as the same? So let's look at this language. Isn't the different also opposite to the same? He says, but this was shown as well, that the one is the same as the others. So right there's difference. There's obvious difference between others and otherness. There's difference between the one and the others. But there's also similarity between the one and the others. So I think the important distinction to make before we continue is to think more on this idea of the one-to-one, that of identity mirroring, that type of sameness, rather than the mass-produced object has similar or it has material things that are the same as itself. And just to be more clear, I think about any sort of industrial manufacturing process that produces, let's say, an iPhone. There are plenty of iPhones that look exactly like mine. Their structure, internal components are the exact same. But it is not the same thing. It's a different thing. So there's the levels of what we speak of, the purity of sameness, and the sort of degraded, if that's a word, sameness, in the sense that it doesn't possess the purity of internal. Even that language is not good to be used. But internal is, in a sense, because the mirror is also an image of sort of a reflection of the internal, or of the essence, let's say, of something. And it's this essence that when compared to itself, we see the same thing. And it's that sort of purity that is not the same when we think about a graduated derivation off of that. When we take one iPhone that comes off the line, and then the one that's immediately after it, the same color and everything, same model. This is a step down of that purity that we're talking about. Parmenides continues and he says, and being the same as the others is the property opposite to being different from the others. I want to point out again the use of the language property. The property is now used to say sameness and otherness. These are not temporary. Well, I suppose they can be, but it's not temporary in the way that we think of many articulate things to possess properties that are more superficial. And perhaps this word needs to evolve in my mind. But not to get too lost in the weeds. And being the same as the others is the property opposite to being different from the others. In this way, I think we can recognize an opposite, because in both cases, although we may be speaking of difference in both cases on a fundamental level, and while we may not be speaking of absolute sameness on a level of purity, there is a way of understanding this by which we can recognize when there is something fundamental that is shared between the one and the others, and something that is fundamentally different about the one and the others, and vice versa. Insofar as the one is different, it was shown to be like, because it shares in difference. So insofar as it is the same, it will be unlike. Because if it is same as itself, then it doesn't participate in the difference of otherness, but it participates in a sense of difference. Because even within itself there is difference. Now in the mirrored sense, when you compare the one to itself, I suppose we would say that it's the same. And in the purity you can't really escape. So insofar as it is the same, it will be unlike, owing to the property opposite to that which makes it like. The property that makes it like is the participation in difference. And surely the different made it like. So the same will make it unlike. Otherwise it won't be opposite to the different. Therefore, the one will be like and unlike the others, insofar as it is different, like, and insofar as it is the same, unlike. It also admits the following. What is that? Says Aristotle. Insofar as it has a property the same, it has a property that is not of another kind. And if it has a property that is not of another kind, it is not unlike. And if not unlike, it is like. But insofar as it has a property other, it has a property that is of another kind. And if it has a property that is of another kind, it is unlike. That's true, says Aristotle. So because the one is the same as the others, and because it is different, on both grounds and either, it would be both like and unlike the others. Certainly, says Aristotle. Right, so there's no way that I could pay attention to that in first pass, so I'd like to go through that paragraph again. So Parmenides is saying that this admits of the following, what we read before this most recent paragraph. Insofar as it has a property the same, it has a property that is not of another kind. So how can we reason through that? In the sense that we mean sameness in the mirrored sense, in the sense of purity, that the one in its particular identity, its particular instantiation, maybe we would say, there are things that are particular to it, and by this we call them its sort of unique property. And because of this uniqueness, it both participates and also does not participate in difference. It participates in the sense that it's unique, but by its uniqueness, it demonstrates sameness to the identity that it participates in. So again, insofar as it has a property the same, it has a property that is not of another kind. And if it has property that is not of another kind, it is not unlike. And if not unlike, it is like. It demonstrates sameness. But insofar as it has a property other, it has a property that is of another kind. So I think these what we've synthesized a moment ago is accurate. He continues, and if it has a property that is of another kind, it is unlike. So because the one is the same as the others, and because it is different on both grounds and either, it would be both like and unlike the others. So we really haven't made much headway, because we're still back at that place where we recognize that the one is somehow participating in many things, or there's influence. We can see fundamental qualities of this thing that we call the one. And yet, by difference, we're unable to admit the fullness of the one in the expression of something particular. So in the same way, says Parmenides, it will be like and unlike itself as well. I suppose we can say that in the totalizing identity, there's sameness of the total, of the unification, but there's difference in the parts. There's difference in being and oneness in being. The coherence unites them and it creates the one. Since in fact it was shown to be both different from itself and the same as itself, on both grounds and either, won't it be shown to be both like and unlike itself? So in the previous paragraph we said like and unlike the others, and then now we're saying like and unlike itself. And what about this? Parmenides says, consider the question whether the one touches or does not touch itself and the others. Very well, says Aristotle. Surely the one was shown to be in itself as a whole. That's right. Isn't the one also in the others? Yes. Then insofar as it is in the others, it would touch the others, but insofar as it is in itself, it would be kept from touching the others, and being in itself would touch itself. Apparently. Thus the one would touch itself and the others. It would. So where have we gone here? We've shifted the language from like and unlike to touch and untouched. So what is the difference here? Well, I think touch moves more towards relation rather than comparison, like that which is like and unlike. Touching is more of an intimate term, it would seem. Now this may seem like a rather strange place to stop, but I think I'm going to end this episode here and pick up immediately after this on episode 14.